I'm Gary, and this is Coasting with Culture. I like to combine theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. Previously, I started exploring the Maritimes of Canada with Prince Edward Island, visiting its 2 amusement parks with coasters. Afterward, I explored the incredible Red Rock coastline of Prince Edward Island National Park, and then stopped by Avonlea Village, a dining and shopping location based off of the fictional town from the novel Anne of Green Gables. Next, it's time to focus on Nova Scotia, starting with visiting the maritime-based attractions of Halifax, including those offering moments of reflection on important events, and then heading to an amusement park with one of the more unique wooden coasters in operation. Spending the morning in Halifax began on a more somber note, with a stop at Fairview Cemetery, a non-denominational cemetery that's best known for being the final resting place of over 100 victims from the sinking of the Titanic. Many of the victims were placed together, and while most had the same headstone, some of the basic headstones were replaced with more elaborate ones if they were identified as a member of the crew or if they had family who paid for a larger, more elaborate headstone. The numbers on the stones also represent the number used by the coroners to help in the identification process, as there were so many bodies brought in at one time. When I was in 7th grade, my 7th grade social studies English block teacher, Ms. Litke, had us do a project about the Titanic, where we learned about the fate of the ship and some of the different things that occurred with the sinking of it. And it just so happened to be around the time that the movie was coming out, so we were able to see the movie shortly after completing the project. A couple of years ago when I was in Denver, I had a chance to visit the house of the mighty Molly Brown, who was one of the survivors from the ship. And now today, as I come to Halifax, I'm able to visit the gravesite of many of the victims of the Titanic, those whose bodies were recovered when the ship sank, and those who had perished because of freezing waters that they were inside of. The one thing that's really bizarre about seeing these graves is the way that the dates are all the same. You know, that's something you're not used to seeing when you visit a graveyard. Usually the dates vary from one gravesite to another, but considering that these folks all passed away because of the same event, there are a couple of gravestones that really stood out, one of which is the grave of the unknown child. Now, a few years ago, they actually had identified the child as Sidney Leslie Goodwin, who is from England. And so they managed to use DNA to try and identify it. At one point, they falsely identified him as the child of Alma Paulson, who's in the gravesite located right behind. One of the other graves that ends up being really popular to see is the grave of one J. Dawson, because people make the mistake of thinking that's the same Jack Dawson from the movie, when in reality it's not. You can also see several grave sites that are unmarked still, as those victims have not been identified. It's a really tragic event considering the amount of life lost, but getting a chance to see this site is personally powerful to me because of the fact that we had learned about this event back when I was in 7th grade. So I just got done talking to some folks who came to visit the gravesite as well, and 2 of them were from Halifax locally with friends visiting from Michigan. And they told me about how the boat museum down at the waterfront has artifacts left over from the Titanic. So I think I'm going to go ahead and make my way there to go scope it out. Because of its location in Nova Scotia and the shape of the land it encompasses, Halifax has a large amount of coastline, and its city center sits along the Halifax Harbour, which has direct access to the Atlantic Ocean, which led to it becoming a major trade port for eastern Canada. Because of this, the city embraces its maritime past through sea-based monuments, artifacts on display, and nautical-themed sculptures and play equipment, along with historic vessels. It's interesting to get to the waterfront area here in Halifax and to be able to see ties to World War I and World War II in the same spot, in part because the Acadia, the ship behind me, had been part of the Royal Canadian Navy during both of the wars, and then on top of that they have the Last Steps Memorial, which pays tribute to the 67,000 Canadians who had served in World War I and lost their lives over in Belgium. There's a similar arch that's been created by an artist from Nova Scotia here that is in Belgium, where many of them had perished during one of the major battles of the war. In this area is an excellent place to learn more about Halifax's connections to the sea, the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. This was the museum recommended to me by the folks I met back at Fairview Cemetery. This museum is home to a wide selection of artifacts and displays ranging from old sailing equipment to model ships, and sharing a look at various seagoing entities, from expedition groups to the Royal Canadian Navy. Two of its larger exhibits focus on tragedies involving Halifax. One is the Halifax explosion, which was caused by the collision of two ships, one of which was filled with powerful explosives. When this occurred in 1917, it was the largest man-made explosion until the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945. The exhibit offers first-hand accounts of this tragic event and a look at the devastation it caused, especially through some of the artifacts like pieces of steel that show just how powerful the blast really was. Back near the Acadia and the Last Steps Memorial, there are additional displays that share information about the explosion if you don't get the chance to go and visit the museum. The other exhibit connected to a tragic event is the Titanic exhibit. This exhibit not only gives detail about the sinking of the ship, but also offers insight into Halifax's role in the rescue and recovery operation as the closest port city to the ship's sinking location. You'll also find items that were recovered from the ship itself on display. Among those that are on display include dishes, silverware, and furniture from the ship. There aren't a lot of items from passengers who perished, as officials in Halifax were concerned about people taking them as souvenirs, so many items belonging to the deceased were destroyed. But here in the museum, there is a notable exception: the shoes of the unknown child, who was later identified as Sidney Goodwin, which were donated by the descendants of the police officer who guarded the bodies and clothing of the victims, and couldn't bring himself to destroy these shoes. After visiting the waterfront, I went to explore the city center a bit more, which in some respects felt a bit like a smaller Seattle because of the downward slope of the streets toward the waterfront. One of the more historic buildings in the city is the Five Fishermen Restaurant, which was built in 1817 as a schoolhouse and later became a mortuary which had received and prepared bodies of the victims for both the Titanic sinking and the Halifax explosion. One of the Titanic victims brought here was John Jacob Astor, the richest passenger aboard the Titanic. Across the street from the restaurant's location is the Grand Parade, the historic military parade square from the city's founding in 1749, with Halifax City Hall at its north end. And to the south end is St. Paul's Anglican Church, which is the oldest building in Halifax. Before heading out to my next stop, I discovered a local pizza place called Yaya's Pizza. This smaller restaurant offers the ability to get whole pizzas along with pizza by the slice, which was perfect for me as a solo traveler. But the important question is, how was it? Well, I'm not gonna lie, that pizza was fantastic. Oh, it was so good. There was kind of this almost rich creaminess to the sauce, almost the way that tomato soup can be sometimes if it's really well made, but it wasn't exactly like it. And the crust was perfection. Oh, so good. That might have been my favorite pizza place in all of Canada so far. I'm not gonna lie, that was great. So I really enjoyed getting a chance to walk around Halifax a little bit and explore. There was a little more than I had originally anticipated I'd be able to, because one of my later stops that I had planned for today wasn't looking like it would be available, and so I went ahead and swapped it out essentially for exploring Halifax a little bit. But now it's getting into the afternoon, got a couple hour drive to go, so I can get to another stop here today. After a few hours drive to Annapolis Royal, I spent a couple hours at Upper Clements Park. This smaller park offers a bit more of an outdoors feel once you get beyond the entrance plaza, as it seems like somebody bought a campground and then added some food stalls and rides to it. One of the park's larger attractions is the flume ride, a log flume that had previously operated at Vancouver's Expo 86 before moving to Nova Scotia, where it opened as one of the park's original attractions. It features 2 main drops and a pretty basic layout, but is still one of the most popular attractions in the park. The main reason for my visit was the roller coaster. It was originally called the Tree Topper when it opened, but was renamed as simply Roller Coaster in 2008. The ride sits on the side of a hill and amongst trees, taking advantage of both to add to the ride experience. And this has one of the more pretty settings because of the creek that it sits alongside of and above in its wooded location. This is a William Cobb designed wooden coaster and has one of the most unique twister layouts, as the first few drops are smaller on the higher part of the hill, and then the first big drop occurs closer to the middle, similar to some of the coasters of Kennywood. From there, it goes into multiple curved drops and climbs before reaching the end of the ride. It's not a very long ride, but its unique layout and little bits of airtime make it a fun experience. It's really neat to be able to come to a place like Upper Clements Park, a place that's really out of the way, but it has a really unique coaster. This is one that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, and to finally be able to ride it, to me, was a really cool experience. On top of the fact that the park is pretty nice. I really like the setting of the park. At this point, it's time to begin the drive back to Halifax. It's going to be a couple hours, and then in the morning it'll be time to get on a plane once again to start heading back to the west, but there will be a stop for a couple of days before heading home. Thank you for watching this Coasting with Culture video. If you'd like to see future videos about combining theme park visits and cultural experiences, please consider clicking that subscribe button down below. You'll also find Coasting with Culture on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, plus more content at coastingwithculture.com. Until next time, take care and safe travels.